welcome to another episode of Tell Us More About That. Somehow we are at episode number 15, which is crazy.
A lot of episodes.
Yes, a lot of episodes. This will also be the first episode where I am not doing this from the brown recliner, and that's not because of all of the comments of people saying, why are you in a brown recliner? It's because this is just a little easier. So we may go back for the next episode, but
Maybe.
All right. So today we have a guest on who I had actually reached out to initially for something totally unrelated to this podcast. But when I was kind of starting the process of going through and considering going back to school, the whole reason I want to go back to school is for to get into law enforcement or military psychology. And I had done some LinkedIn searching, and I found do you pronounce the last name? Is it Kuhlman?
Yes. Yeah, that's it. Good
Okay,
job.
Cool. So I found Dr. Katherine Kuhlman and sent her a message, and she was super generous with her time. And she kind of walked me through things to expect with the program for school, and then also like what the job is in general of being a psychologist for law enforcement. So that conversation is kind of what, when we started the podcast, I thought back to it and I was like, that would be an amazing discussion to record and to ask some more pointed questions about the industry in general. So here we are.
Yeah.
So yeah, without further ado, I can introduce our guest for the day, Dr. Katherine Kuhlman.
Thanks, guys. It's really wonderful to be here. I appreciate you reaching back out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with this. Can you just provide some background as to who you are and what your role is?
Yeah, so I am a psychologist, trained clinically, and I'm board certified in police and public safety psychology, which is now a specialization, which is awesome, from the American Board of Professional Psychology. Yes, there's not many of us, but we're trying to get more, so come on in. So I run a group practice in Scottsdale, Arizona. I've been doing the work in police psychology for about 10 years now. And my practice solely focuses on public safety psychology. So that looks like everything from doing therapy with first responders and sometimes their family members, to the hiring pre-employment psychological evaluations before people get on the job. It's fit for duty evaluations if something happens where they might not be able to perform their job duties, critical incident response and debriefings after traumatic incidents. And I'm very fortunate that I get to travel a decent amount of time around the country and do public speaking about officer wellness and stress and trauma too. So it's really never a dull moment.
Yeah, that sounds.
You're busy.
Yeah, very, very busy
That's
lifestyle.
Yeah.
But they say it's not work if you love what you do. So
Yeah.
Are they right?
yes, yeah. Oh, I pinch myself still. I'm like, how am I doing this?
So it actually
amazing.
it's a good kind of lead into how did you get into this? Because I feel like a lot of people, whether they had like a specific connection to law enforcement, whether that be a parent or a spouse or an experience when they were a kid or something along those lines. But what was it that kind of drew you to this population?
There was a couple of things. So my grandfather was an FBI agent, and I always loved and respected his work. We were not as close as I would have liked just because we lived far away from one another, but I always really respected what he did. Like lots of teenagers and high school students probably in our generation, I watched a lot of Law and Order. I watched a lot of Criminal Minds. I was like, oh, I'm going to be an FBI profiler. Well, come to learn, there's not that many. It's kind of a hard job to get. That was an unrealistic expectation back in the day. So I get into college and I start studying psychology. That was a natural fit for me in the way that my mind worked. And I also I double majored in criminal justice as well, because there was a point where I thought, well, maybe I could get into law enforcement myself. It feels like a cool job. I would like to help people. Until I learned, you're stupid when you're a kid, right? You have no idea what the real world is like. I'm like, oh, well, I have to be on patrol for a couple of years before I become a detective. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's no fun. And also I have to wear a uniform and also I have to wear my hair up.
Yeah.
No.
Nope.
Let me tell you some things I don't do.
Yeah.
I don't put my hair up. Even at the gym, it is down all the time. So I was like, I am way too feminine for this masculine job. I thought about law school for a while. I thought, okay, well, I could be like a prosecutor. That could be another way I kind of get into this field and that I can help. Started studying for the LSATs. I think I threw the book across the room because I was so frustrated with it. And finally, I realized, oh, there's this entire field of forensic psychology, and that seems like the perfect blend of criminal justice and psychology. And at the time, I was not ready to commit to a doctorate. I thought, oh my gosh, 4 years of college, I can't possibly commit to 4 to 5 more years of school. So I got a master's degree and I really enjoyed it. I felt like towards the end of my master's that there was still so much to learn, which is why I got the doctorate. And most of my training throughout my doctoral program was very forensic focused. I had kind of switched to like, okay, I want to do competency evaluations, insanity, expert witness testimony, and stuff like that. And then, at the end of your doctoral training, you go through what's called an internship. It's basically psychology's version of a residency. And there's this whole algorithm that matches candidates to sites. So you don't have a whole lot of choice. You can apply where you want to apply, but an algorithm chooses where you go.
That's interesting.
And I ended up matching with a police psychologist in Denver. And it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. It was at least at that time, was the only police psychology internship in the country. And everything else that I had applied for was, state hospitals, Bureau of Prisons. And it was the best thing. Like it was a godsend. And I thought, oh my gosh, I found my people. Like I get to do the work I want to do. I get to work with people that actually want to be in the room with me.
Yeah.
It's not just an excuse to get out of their cell and sit with a girl. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, like they're there because they want to be there.
Yeah.
And, it just kind of was the perfect blend of everything, like sense of humor wise, you feel like you do good work. It's, I think, very much an underserved population. And it takes a certain person to be able to kind of fit in with it. And I've just kind of taken the bull by the horns and just
Gone all
kept
in.
going with it. Yeah, like I'm so happy that I ended up where I ended up.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. That sounds like things kind of fell in line with
Yeah.
how you were hoping they would.
Well, it's almost, but I wasn't though. Like at first, I was like, "No, this is not what I wanted."
Stupid
Yeah,
algorithm. Yeah.
that damn algorithm. But hey, no. But it's like, well, okay, fate worked out. Like this was where I was supposed to be. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so. Getting into that specifically, like, I feel like there are a lot of people, and you and I have even talked about this. Jen's a therapist, and the idea of like working with that population, it does on the surface, it feels like it would be very fulfilling. But then this concept of, well, they wouldn't respect me. I've never worked in that industry. Kind of the imposter syndrome is almost like put under a magnet or a magnifying glass, rather. Is that something that you felt or dealt with at the beginning?
oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a number of therapists that kind of get into this profession who are former law enforcement officers, and like they come in with that credibility. I didn't come in with that credibility. I was 28 years old when I graduated with my doctorate, so I was still very young. Working with most people who were older than me. And I called it borrowed credibility. Like so my mentor, my supervisor, the guy who ran the firm that I was working at, he's like an OG police psychologist. He was Denver PD psychologist back in the 1970s. And so because I worked for him, like I got to borrow his credibility,
Sure.
which, so that was huge. I mean, and he was the one that kind of gave me these opportunities to learn to speak or to train. And, I would go on ride-alongs and I would kind of just really try to dive into the culture. But it took a while to build up that credibility and that reputation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because I mean we've talked about it, and I'm still trying to figure out kind of like where I live in the mental health field. After grad school, they're kind of like, here's the degree, go be free,
Yeah.
Go have fun. Yeah.
What
Right.
do I do? And Tony is interested in doing a little bit of what it sounds like you do. and I kind of do the other half of it, but we've talked about it, and I'm like, well, I just don't feel like I would be credible to even show up, and half of the job is just like giving, allowing space for people. But then there's like very valuable questions or concerns that like certain populations would have for the people that are trying to support them. And so I have a lot of, it's not even just imposter syndrome. Like I do feel like an imposter in that room with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you probably get that though with any line of work in mental health of you don't necessarily need to be a subject matter expert in the field that they represent. You just need to allow them to feel trust and safe, with you to help them. But
did you find any like any pushback or any concerns when you first started from kind of the person on the couch?
Oh, yes. And I still do. Like every so often, I mean, this is a population that is distrustful of outsiders in general. And I mean, I've been tested many times.
Sure. Yeah.
A lot of times I'll have somebody come into the room and I think they just start off with their most shocking story just to see how I'm going to respond. Like, am I going to flinch? Is my jaw going to drop? Are they going to make me cry? There's times where I'm certain that they're trying to make me cry. And part of it's like, there's no way this person can help me because everything I've been through is so tough. Like I am that bad. I'm that traumatized and that injured. I feel like I've heard some really crazy things and I don't really get surprised every so often.
Yeah.
And then I always joke, I'm like, I live in Scottsdale. My face is full of Botox anyway. So it's expressionless for the most part. So
you'll never know.
I can smile, but that's about it.
That's good.
All right. So, get Botox is what I'm hearing.
Okay. Gotcha.
Then you're good with your expression. Yeah. It's just
I gotta
stoic.
work on my expressions anyway.
Yes.
That's good. When I first started I was with NCIS for a little bit, and I was 25 when I first started with them. And I remember it was one of the first 5 interviews that I did. The woman walked into the room and she looked at me and she said, first thing she said was, "Honey, how old are you?" I was like, oh God, that's like that's the most terrifying question to get when you're in that particular position. So whether it's age or just like, if you don't look the part for that particular role, I would imagine it gets that imposter syndrome or just that fear of not being accepted is real.
You don't start off with like a neutral balance in the relationship. It's very, whether it's defensive or just a little hesitant, it makes it a little bit just harder to break through and kind of start working together, I think.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've found to be helpful kind of across the board and what I've told the people that I supervise too is that authenticity is so important. Because also, I mean, they're going to know if you're lying. They're going to know if you're BSing them. So you might as well just be yourself. And I tend to self-disclose more than I would with other types of clients that I've seen in the past.
Interesting.
And it helps to build the trust.
Yeah. That's really interesting. That group, especially, their cops are already, and you mentioned this earlier, just skeptical of people. And I wanted to ask about this later, but maybe this is the right time for it. When you get people in a position where if they disclose the wrong thing, and maybe wrong is the wrong way to label that, but if they make certain disclosures or if they give you an indication that maybe they're not mentally fit to be carrying a weapon and to be doing the job they're doing, that they may lose or temporarily be suspended in part of their job duties, right? If they make certain disclosures or say certain things that give you reason to pause, do you find that to be a hindrance in getting that population to really open up and come see you in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the biggest myths, I think, with, whether it's cops or firefighters seeking therapy is that, I mean, there is a level of emotional stability and psychological adjustment that's expected to be able to perform job duties, right? And they come in and they're worried, if they have symptoms of PTSD, does that mean that their gun's going to get taken away from them and they can't work? And like, what people need to understand is that like a cop's firearm might as well be his third leg. like that is like such a part of their identity and who they are for most of them, that like that's a very big day, very, very big deal, that you're stripping something away if you take that from them.
Yeah.
And so they have this belief that like if I come in and I disclose, that I'm having so much trouble sleeping that I'm tired during the day, that like that's going to impact them. And the reality is that like with any type of other therapy, I start this off by saying like, this because you're also a mandated reporter like I am, that if you tell me that you are harm to self, others, or tell me about any child abuse, that I have a legal obligation to report that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then I say, outside of that, everything stays in this room. And then I also say, I'm very clear with the way of the record keeping that I keep. So like the notes that I keep on my law enforcement and fire clients are vague, and they are intentionally vague. They are enough to jog my memory if I am ever subpoenaed, but they are not enough to get somebody in trouble if they tell me something. And so I tell them that, and I say, and you can look anytime you want. So I'm trying to like give them like
my clients' notes.
You
if
can
you like.
no, they would have a field day with that.
Oh no.
No, but you can look at your notes anytime. I'll send them to you anytime you want. You can see, right? Like that'll help you trust me. And then I'm like, and if I messed up, you can sue me. I've got great liability coverage.
Yeah, that's why we have it. Oh my gosh, I love that.
So I just like put it out there like that, like, you feel like I've got something over you by you telling me things, but also you've got something over me if I mess up.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
To give them a little leverage.
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously in the context of a fitness for duty evaluation or like a pre-employment, like they're not the client. So it's a little bit different, but like in a therapy context, absolutely.
Is your role, I know you had mentioned you have 3 or 4 kind of main responsibilities. Are they all pretty equally balanced? Do you tend to spend more time kind of in one portion of your role over others?
It's probably, so I rarely take new therapy clients now because my role has very much shifted to be more evaluations and more public speaking.
Okay.
And it's just hard to have a regular therapy schedule and keep people consistent when you're traveling 3 times a month.
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
So it's,
and I'm still provisionally licensed. So I've got my LPC in Illinois. So I'm not fully individually licensed yet, but even without traveling, it's hard to keep clients consistent, period. Let alone like you have your own life or you have your own schedule or other things that you do. It is really hard to do that full time and make it like a functioning, long-lasting business.
mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that I've noticed with this population in general too, I think like we go through grad school, and at least like one of the things that I was taught was, okay, Joe Smith, you are coming Tuesdays, 10 a.m. Like that's your standing appointment. It does not work that way. I mean, especially with firefighters, because they work, 24 or 48 hours and they're off for a couple of days. So their schedule is different every single week. But for a lot of like law enforcement officers, detectives, for example, oftentimes on call, SWATs oftentimes on call. So they, I'll get a text 10 minutes before session, like I'm out on an op.
Yeah.
I'm on a crime scene. I can't come in.
I bet you don't have like a late cancellation or a no-show fee.
It depends. But if it's work related, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
If it's like I slept in, then that's a different. But for work related stuff, nope, I don't do a no-show fee or like late cancellation just because like they can't help it.
Yeah.
And then I get called out too.
Right.
So like we have this agreement basically during the whole informed consent process where, look, I know your job and I'm not going to be a jerk to you if you need to cancel because emergencies happen. And I hope that you can give me the same too, because if there's a line of duty death or if there's an officer involved shooting, I might get a call and I might have to cancel on you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you find that in the therapy sessions, like when you're first meeting with a new client or their family or whatever the setup is, do you find that it takes them a while to get comfortable and start opening up, or do you find that it's pretty kind of free flowing?
It depends on the person. I've had clients where it took me a year to build trust.
Mm-hmm.
And typically those are clients who have tried other therapists in the past and maybe been burned, and they just are their walls are up so high. Usually it takes a couple of sessions, and I try not to force treatment plans or diagnoses or you need to trust me or get them into anything really deep until I can actually tell that they're ready for it. But on occasion, like I'll get somebody who sits down the first time, like, okay, let's get into this.
Yeah.
I'm ready. Let's go. So it's all across the board.
Yeah.
I would say that in general, it takes longer to build rapport.
Yeah.
Sure.
How do you even go about getting people to come to you? Like if you have the people that they were mandated essentially to come, like mandated wellness, which is that a thing that you see a lot of, where departments are kind of slotting their people into sessions?
Yeah, so mandated sessions will usually be, so some departments are doing like mandatory wellness visits where they will require everybody in the department or maybe everybody on a certain squad, if it's like special victims or major crimes, to meet with me or somebody on my team once a year. And it's one session, and it's just a kind of a check-in, and here's some things that could be helpful for you. Call me if anything comes up. Those are nice because it kind of breaks the stigma down a little bit, and everybody's doing it. I see the chief too, like he's showing up to his appointment. And then you also see mandated. So after critical incidents, I've got one department, and literally every single critical incident, not just shootings, but like we pulled a body out of the canal, like everybody involved has to have a session, which like sometimes for them probably feels excessive, but like it's also again like a really good thing. Like we're just going to normalize these conversations, and look, all 8 of you guys are going. We're not just picking out this one person that seems a little bit messed up. So that happens, but like the voluntary therapy, when I first moved to Arizona, I didn't know anybody. Like I had done everything, worked in Colorado for years, came to Arizona, and I had no connections in this field for the most part. And so I had to do a lot of my own networking. I had to kind of prove myself in a new place, in a place where people didn't know my name or my boss. And so I kind of figured out, okay, here's the nonprofit that's really big in the state that does a lot of work with first responders. And I spoke at one of their conferences on wellness. And that's kind of what got people in the door. Because there were people there that were like, oh, I think maybe she knows what she's talking about. And then since then, it's been, I've got a website, but I don't advertise. Like it's all word of mouth.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you're staying busy just based on your reputation, which is
it's like the equivalent of like, oh, like you need a plumber. I've got a guy. Like, oh, okay, yeah.
You need a psychologist? I got a girl.
Which is cool too, because then you're coming in, if it's kind of referral based, you're coming in with even the smallest level of some type of inherent trust from that person, because they know their buddy trusts you, which is helpful. Do you do any types of roll call kind of info sessions where you like go to a police department and you just get in front of them and say, I exist? Because I feel like a lot of cops don't even really, especially smaller departments, like they don't really think about the idea of taking care of their mental health and even paying attention to it. So like, how do you get in front of those pockets?
I have in the past. I haven't lately. It's one of those, it's a huge time commitment to like get to every single person. Some have done, like I'll write like something for a newsletter that goes out. So that's getting a little bit ahead of it. We'll do group debriefings sometimes after critical incidents. So that would be, is that a cat? So sometimes there'll be group things. I do some work with a federal law enforcement agency, and they call them all hands meetings, and gone and talked to them about like, here's your EAP services. Here's what that includes. No, I'm not going to tell the, administrator of your big federal law enforcement agency what you tell me.
Right. Okay.
I think it's so funny too that that very just across the board level confidentiality piece is like, it's still the same in here. And I think you're right. Like, and it's a case by case, like, trust the therapeutic relationship and trust your, psychologist judgment of like, does this need to go one step further? Can I ask other questions? How can we tease this out, rather than just like, guard is up, now something has to happen. So I do think like having that out there and, being very clear about that is helpful in getting people in and having them come back and kind of keeping that up and running.
Yeah. So you mentioned the things that would force you to report, right? Like any disclosures they make, and you're upfront with that on the front end. But I feel like with some police, where if they have like a drinking issue, is there a threshold there where, because that obviously could impact their ability to do their jobs in a lot of respects. Is there a point where you would have to disclose even that type of information, or is that all 100? No, that's 100% safe space as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's no different, right? I mean, I would tell them I had a concern,
Right.
but I mean, I'm not going to go tell their agency.
Yeah. Okay. It's cool. I mean, I don't know about even the extent of the type of information and confidentiality that you can have being in law enforcement previously and, being interested in the mental health field. I think there are a lot of misnomers and misunderstandings just with like, what does that even look like and how much can I really trust this person? And it sounds like you can trust this person. Mm-hmm. So it's just, it's an investment in your happiness and your ability to maintain your sanity while you're doing the job and maintain your personal life, that can make a really big impact if you go for it.
I'm trying to kind of tease it out in my head too, of like where that line would be. So if they are actively hurting someone else, hurting themselves, or someone is hurting them, or there's child abuse, or if there is like clear intent and a plan to do those things as well, is that where you would breach too, or?
Exactly. Yeah. I think one of the more difficult spots though is like when it comes to suicide, and suicidal ideation. Most states have red flag laws where if you are involuntarily psychiatrically hospitalized, you lose your right to purchase or carry a firearm. Mm-hmm. So obviously that's going to be a huge deal for law enforcement because it's kind of required to do their job. They need that gun.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of times, like that can be sometimes a tricky place because like we know that suicide kills more officers than line of duty deaths. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of officers that think about suicide, that don't disclose it out of fear. Mm-hmm. And like that can sometimes be a very like gray area. And ultimately it comes down to imminence and plan. Obviously they have the means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, like, is this somebody that like, can I get them off of work for 30 days so that they can go to a residential treatment center, get intensive care, come back? Mm-hmm. Like that's an option. And it's totally voluntary. I've had people before, okay, I'm going to use a week of PTO and like use this as a time, come into treatment 2 to 3 days that week, focus on a lot of self-care. I'm going to lock my guns up. I've had clients give me the key to their gun safe before, mm-hmm. Wow. Which is like, to me, that's like, oh my gosh, what an honor.
Yeah.
That like you trust me with that. So those situations get a little bit more finicky. And one of the other good things is that a lot of departments are starting to get on board with recognizing that like, this is an injury that can be healed, that this isn't like a done deal. And a lot of agencies now are saying, look, if somebody comes to us, if one of our officers comes to us and says that they're having thoughts of suicide, if they want to hurt themselves, if they've got a drinking problem that they just can't control, if their PTSD is so intrusive that they just can't work, like we will get them the treatment they need. Like we will have one of our own peer supporters sit on a plane with them and fly them out to a treatment center that specializes in this. Like that's what they're trying to do now.
Right.
That's such a total game changer in the culture of, instead of like making it seem like there's something wrong with them, they're weak, or they're going to lose their job because they can't stay, peak performance mentally. Instead saying, we acknowledge that this happens, and we know that this happens to the best people in certain scenarios, and we will support you the entire way through. That's, that will hopefully change, the tide of people feeling comfortable to come forward. And also, like, even just hearing you talk for a short amount of time, you clearly are advocating for the officer in the therapeutic session. So people going in with this mindset of like, you're out to catch them or to trip them up, to get them to say something so that they can get, remove their access, or their, have to take leave or whatever else. It couldn't be more opposite of what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
That's cool.
And you're so right. If they are supported in the right way, we can turn this around. But you can't support someone unless they're willing to work with you on it. And so even having someone give you the key to their gun safe, or
that's great. Yeah, that's awesome.
That is like sign number one that like they're like proactively taking taking the help and taking the support that they need, and like they're in that with you. They're not kind of giving up the reins of their own life. That's huge. That's
real trust. That's awesome. So with the conversation around trust, one of our best friends is an operational psychologist, and he gets embedded with some of the special operations units in the military. And so this guy's going out on missions with them. He's going out on trainings, and he's friends. And now we're friends with those people as well. So they trust him to a level that is so much more than going to see your therapist once a week, which is what you need. What I haven't really seen that as much in law enforcement. Like, do you see that in the role that you've done, or you do, or just in law enforcement psychology, where psychologists are getting kind of embedded within the agency? That you mentioned doing ride-alongs, which is so cool. Like, you're spending time with them outside of a therapeutic setting.
So I'm not embedded. All of my work is contract, but there are a lot of agencies that have psychologists who are embedded in their agency, and who work in an operational capacity too. So like LAPD, for example, huge behavioral health team, tons of police psychologists, and they include their psychologists in SWAT. And so they're trained in negotiations. They are there on call outs. They become embedded. And so like, that's really cool. You see it certainly more in larger departments because they've got the funds for it. You can imagine that like if a department has one psychologist serving 200 people, that could pose some issues. And then sometimes there's even more distrust with the embedded psychologist, because it's like, well, you actually report to the chief. Your office is down the hallway from, like, how do I know, right? Yeah, people are going to see me. So there's that. But we're going to see, I think, probably more of it.
Do you have, obviously just based on your experience, but do you have a preference of a system that is most effective, whether it's a hybrid of being like partially embedded, fully embedded, or being fully removed as a contractor? Like, which one do you think is the most successful relationship between the operator and the psychologist?
I mean, for the operator, it's probably an embedded one, but for law enforcement in general, I don't know. I don't know the answer, because it also depends so much on the culture and the morale of the department, and, what kind of latitude they give their psychologist and the freedom that they give them. So I have a friend who works for a department or worked for a department in Florida. And he was able to negotiate and say, I want to make sure my office is not in headquarters. I want an office elsewhere, and I want it unmarked. So then it protected the officers who were coming in and out. And then if he needed to be at headquarters for a meeting, or if he needed to go anywhere, then he would just go to them. So he wasn't always around. And that helped to create that trust, but that's not going to be possible everywhere.
So I guess everybody's different, obviously, but some of the common issues that you see that tend to surface when you're interacting with law enforcement, things that they are struggling with, that you help them kind of work through and overcome? Are there the top things that you see most consistently that could be addressed in different ways, maybe a little bit more proactively, or could be communicated to potential law enforcement recruits in advance to try to get ahead of some of these problems that just consistently keep popping up?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Outside of the normal issues that we all face day to day, whether
Yeah.
it's relationships or raising kids or finances and, dealing with family members or whatever it may be. I mean, I think one is the stress of the job and ultimately the trauma of the job. This is a profession that people like that are in it tend to highly identify with. So, like, their identity becomes I'm a cop, I'm a police officer, I'm an agent, I'm a firefighter. And that makes the work life balance very difficult when you don't really, if that's your identity and you're coming home and you're still adopting that identity. And it can sometimes cause things like overworking, taking on extra shifts, being more apathetic at home, which leads to relationship problems. And so I think recognizing the stress of the job, like the adrenaline addiction that can happen, and taking steps to balance that out is like important at the outset of the career, and making sure and having command and supervisors that model good behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a big one. And then one of the things that I think maybe those who don't work with this population may not recognize is the administrative stress and like the administrative betrayal that people experience, feeling unsupported by their agencies, and the amount of stress that causes because, like you start a job and this is a career. Ideally, you want to put in your 20 to 25 years because oftentimes there's a pension at the end of it, right? So if you've been in for 10 to 15 years, financially, it doesn't make a lot of sense to leave unless you can get into that same pension program. Like in Arizona, it's a big it's a statewide pension system. So you can lateral to other departments and stay in the system.
That's nice.
Yeah, but not everywhere is like that. So then you kind of feel stuck. And, you're dealing with leadership changes, and every new chief that comes in always makes changes. And even if they're silly and little, everybody raises a big stink about it because it's not the way we did it. And
yeah, that's tough. That what you just introduced, the getting to that, like the past the point of no return, is what I've heard a lot of people talk about. Like 8 to 10 years, you've committed already. You may as well now see to the end. That's a really can be a really depressing place to be because you started with all these high hopes 10 years ago, and now you're at this point where you're just so depleted. So imagining just staying for the same amount of time can be like almost overwhelming.
yeah, and those first couple of years are fun because it's like, oh, yay, like I'm going to go catch the bad guys. And then you realize that, I catch bad guys and I put them away, but they end up right back out on the streets,
Yep.
or the prosecutor doesn't want to prosecute. And now I feel so defeated. And so like you're like the values that you came into the job with and like your whole reason for wanting to pursue a career, like you're kind of questioning.
Yeah. And this is very different in terms of the like acuity of stress, but I've worked in school settings as a counselor and as a public service employee. Like you have that pension at the end as well. And, I have a lot of friends that have gotten to that 10 or 15 and they're like, I can't do 5 more. Like I'm going to start over. I can't do it any longer because you have, it's not the systems within your building that are as bad sometimes, but it's those, like you had said, those next steps, like the bad guys are back on the street and that's a system that I can't control or that I don't work under, or decisions are being made from state level down that like you can't control within your own unit or building. And it makes it really hard to feel like you have control over kind of what you're doing and what you're expected to do. So that's burnout. You're feeling trapped now and your financial stability is on the line. Like that's a lot.
It's tough. Yeah. It's, when it comes to the the realities of the job in law enforcement. And maybe it's changed a little bit now, but I feel like when I started, I did local in Virginia for a little bit, and then I got on with NCIS and did the child sexual assault investigations, child pornography investigations. And as a 25, 26-year-old, I could not have been more excited to like get the job, go to the academy. It was the best time I have ever had in a profession. And then the reality of what the job was, like the first day showing up to a suicide and actually seeing it, like not seeing it in a book, not seeing it on TV, but actually seeing it and seeing like the tenured agents that have seen hundreds and them having like no response, the jokes, like the humor, that's a whole thing, like coping strategies and things, but getting exposed to that, like jumping in the deep end immediately. And then seeing like, especially in those specialized units, like the child pornography investigations and the types of people that you have to talk to and investigate. And it's, I felt like looking back on it, I just became so miserable, so depressed so fast. Like within a year, I was like, there's no fucking way I can do this for my career. It's not feasible. And I just became so kind of distraught with the whole thing. And looking back on it now, there was nothing in the hiring process. There was not a single question or topic that anybody even alluded to that would have checked just to see like, hey, how are your feelings around, being exposed to these types of things? How do you think you would handle this type of thing? How do you think, like, how do you cope? How do you process?
What are your support systems?
What are your support systems? I'm hoping from a hiring perspective, that's something that is evolving. Like, can you speak to that?
It should be, yes. Yeah. And the focus of it is it's honestly more of a rule out than a rule in process, meaning we're looking for problems versus like, hey, this is a good candidate.
Yeah.
But, we're looking for problems with stress management, emotional instability, impulse control, social consciousness, integrity, judgment, decision making, critical thinking skills, stuff like that. So most agencies require that. That being said, like as psychologists, our role is to be the risk assessor and to, write and verbalize those risks to the department, but the department's the risk manager. So they ultimately are the hiring authority. So, there have been situations where I have not recommended somebody, but they still get hired.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the department's liability at that point if they felt like at the time they had enough information to mitigate the concerns. So, but interestingly, the exception to that. So most states require it. It's not required at the federal level. It is agency dependent. So the DEA, for example, requires it for all federal agents. The FBI requires it if a person reports a history of any kind of mental health problem or treatment or medication. Border Patrol does the same thing. Secret Service does the same thing. So they're more focused on like, is this mental health issue no longer a problem versus like, okay, do you have the coping skills, the support system to manage the inherent stressors of the job? So it's a little bit different because plenty of people are emotionally stable, right? They don't have a history of mental health problems, but that doesn't mean that they're amazing at managing stress.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know necessarily that it's like a skill that people are born with all the time either, like being able to cope and manage stress. So like the assessment and the psych screening.
Not at all.
Yeah.
We are the rub some dirt in it generation.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
No.
But that's kind of my point though, is with the psych evaluation and going through the rigorous hiring process, not once did I never even considered that this is not going to be something I'm going to be really, really good at. Like I felt like this is going to be my dream job, but I never also considered that I'm going to be sitting in a closet reviewing child pornography 3 days a week for 7 hours at a time, or showing up and doing these things, or, working these insane hours. And my time spent at work was doing these very stressful things. So it's the idea, I guess, of are we first hiring the right people, which it sounds like those things are more or less in place, but then are we setting these people up to be successful? Like, are we teaching them these strategies and these coping skills so that they can have some longevity in the position and understand, like, this is normal to feel overwhelmed by this. Let's talk about how to process it. Let's talk about, how this can impact you and all these different things. I feel like that's maybe where it's lacking a little.
Yeah. And I think that like one of the areas that we could probably do a lot better is like that supervisory level. So not the command staff and the boots on the ground, right? Like they get stuff in the academy, but like what about like the sergeant level, the
Yeah.
people who are training? I mean, it would be great if, if we had officers or detectives who are working, right, like working in sexual crimes against children. If you had a supervisor that said, hey, you need to step out of that dark closet every couple of hours and go do something mindless because it's not good for you to have your mind on that all of like you're overexposing yourself and that's not good. And like, I'm going to support you in doing that. And if you don't want to do it, I'm going to make you because that's what you need to do for your own mental health. Like we need to educate that supervisor level to like look out for their people, know what to look for and to like model best practices and self-care so that people don't get to that place of burnout.
Yeah, it's such a good point too. And you had said something earlier that really resonated. This idea of normalizing just feelings and like how people are struggling with certain things. I remember my supervisor said to me, this is how this works. You're new. You're going to do all these things because this is what the new guys do, which I get that. But also he said, priorities are God, NCIS, family. And I was like, oh my God, did I pick the wrong profession?
26.
Yeah, I'm 26 years old, man. But that's like,
where does Coors Light fall on this?
I can't, I have so much like, I don't know what the right word is for it, but looking back on like that version of myself, if I could have talked to that version and been like, dude, what you're feeling is so normal. Like, let's talk through how to manage it. Like this is normal, anticipated stress that comes with this type of work. But it's just extending that hand and doing it in a way that's not stigmatizing and not judgmental. It's expected, right? And that's
right.
Yeah.
Well, I think
And having like a mentor that's like, okay, yeah, like this is some really fucked up shit.
Yeah.
And like, here's how we stay resilient through it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's exactly it. Like, I love what you said about having someone at the supervisory or the training level or literally anyone else in the room to be like, is anyone else seeing this? Like, this can't be normal because if you look around and the 15 people around you are like white knuckling through the day and no one's saying anything, like that's the expectation of everybody else. And so I've seen it too. And I've experienced where I'm like, this feels wrong, but no one's saying that it's wrong.
Yep.
So like,
Yeah.
I guess this is just what it is. And that makes it really hard. You almost start like second guessing your own gut and your own intuition. And you just adopt anything you can in order to like move through it, survive through the situation. And that is, why turnaround time is for you was a year and a half.
Yeah, and thank God I did. And this whole thing started from that like getting over the hump, that 10 years, because I went down my hall I was at Camp Lejeune, and I remember asking a lot of the agents that I trusted, like, here's where I'm at, here's what I'm dealing with, here's what I'm feeling. What do you think? And I'd been on for a year and a half, and they're like, man, if I only recognized that I was going to feel this way as soon as you're recognizing it, I would have got the hell out of here. But now I've been here for this long, so I'm going to stay. And like hearing that from people who have been on for years, they're like, God, I wish I left sooner, but now I'm stuck, essentially, was the message I was getting. That's what was kind of my motivation. And thank God, like it was the right decision for me at the time, but that's what's kind of inspired this, like go back and fix a problem that I didn't have a fix for when I was in that position type thing, which is what you're doing, which is why I like what you said at the beginning of we need more people doing this.
Come on in.
Yeah, because it sounds like there is a shortage with law enforcement. Yeah. So I guess we can kind of close it out here with this, but
can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
You want to do most of what Katherine does, right? Do you want to do, I know you said that you don't think, or you're not sure that you're super interested in like the therapy side of it, but you want to do like the process or the screeners and the evaluations and things like that.
Yeah. Right? I mean, I could see, I don't really know yet. I don't want to put my foot down on it yet. Cause I think there's so much. And even you said this to me when I talked to you of like, just get in there and see what you like, try everything. And to your point, you're doing something you didn't even think you were going to be doing because
I didn't even know it existed. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I think everything that you're doing, Catherine, they're so integrated with each other. Like your ability to sit in really hard moments in therapy with someone also allows you to like see the gray area in the evaluations and the screeners that you do, or maybe ask different questions. And then it also influences how you present and the things that you focus on. And I mean, all of that makes so much sense to me that it's all working so well together.
It's really nice. I feel very fortunate.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that the APA, did they just recently recognize police psychology?
So the American Board of Professional Psychology, I don't know the year that police and public safety American Board of Professional Psychology has different specialties for board certification. Police and public safety psychology, maybe 20 years old. And then Division 18 of the APA, also around the same, I want to say.
Okay.
It's one of the newer ones.
Yeah, that's good. So where do you, I mean, it's been around, I guess, for a little bit, which is good. It's not brand new. We were talking to someone about the military psychology, and that one does sound like it's pretty new, the operational psych piece of it. Where do you see police psychology going in the next few years from an evolutionary standpoint?
I think that if anything, it'll be it's only growing. It's not going to become like a lesser known specialty. I think that we'll probably see a lot more interest in it. We'll probably then see more like graduate level coursework in police psychology to help educate people, more continuing education. I think that we're going to see, especially as departments become more consumed with millennials and Gen Z, as boomers and X start to kind of retire. We know that millennials and Gen Z are a lot more open-minded to therapy and mental health. And so I think that we'll see a lot more utilization, a lot more openness to training, other types of modalities. I mean, I know departments that have, like, they contract with people to come do yoga. Like, that would not have happened 10 years ago. I know, that's crazy. I mean, even I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But
I don't feel about yoga.
I don't know how I feel.
Is that in California?
Well, of course it's in California,
Yeah.
but like, no, but there's some departments here that are doing it. And you would be, so I don't know what news channel you guys watch, but, so one of our sheriffs, Mark Lamb, he's on Fox News all the time. Yeah. He was on Live PD. He's amazing. He's running for Senate. So his county, it's just south of where I am in Maricopa, but I work a lot with his sheriff's office, and I love them so much. Probably one of the best best morale that I see in the state, and super progressive when it comes to wellness, actually.
That's amazing.
Yeah, like yoga, let's try out this app that does brainwave stuff, like whatever you guys need. We're going to debrief literally every single critical incident. We're going to throw mental health in your face.
We're going to make you be mentally well.
Yeah, they go all in. Like,
that's so cool.
That's awesome.
It's not a coincidence, I'm sure, that it's the highest morale, and they're also super progressive with mental health. Yeah.
Right. When his deputies are like, I love our sheriff. Like, I don't want him to leave.
Don't go to the Senate. That's not going to help us.
To the Senate.
Yeah.
No.
They
love him.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's good to hear.
Yeah, I like that too. So the kind of the evolution towards accepting it and not seeing it as some like pseudo frou-frou thing. It's this stuff works, and it helps us be better at our jobs and manage our lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And it behooves the agency, because if they're thinking dollar signs.
Right.
But it makes sense for them to spend the money up front on prevention instead of the early retirements for PTSD, the workers' compensation claims, the call outs because I just can't come into work today.
Yeah.
And having to pay somebody else overtime. Like, it makes sense for them financially to want to invest in the wellness of their officers and deputies.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's cool. I know we're almost at the hour. I did have one question, though, that I forgot to ask. So with the guest we had on from the UK, she studied investigative psychology, which I'd actually never heard of that particular track for a PhD.
PhD.
Yeah. And so she was talking about how she's hoping that the industry will move towards embedding investigative psychologists over in the UK to do like consulting on cases, and kind of like what you touched on a little bit with LAPD. It sounds like they're already doing that a little bit. Can you see that happening also more so in the States, of an embedded psychologist kind of checking all these other boxes of their roles, but also like doing case consulting, behavioral assessment, that type of thing?
I can see it. I mean, so like I know LAPD has been doing it probably the longest as far as in the States goes. And obviously the FBI has the BAU, which they kind of like will farm out to any department that is requesting it, depending on the circumstances. But that's not always an option. And so I do think that like as psychologists in general get more credibility with this tough population, that they'll recognize how else like our brains and our abilities can be utilized.
And Catherine, just like you, I wanted to be JJ when I grew up so bad. Oh,
Which one's JJ? Is that Law and Order?
He's the pretty blonde one.
he's a pretty blonde in
Of
Criminal
course.
Minds.
Criminal Minds.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, I've seen every single episode 4 times over. I wanted to be in the BAU so bad, and then I think one day I was just like, "There's no way.
It's just not
There's
gonna
absolutely no way I could do this thing." But like Law and Order SVU and criminal, like that has shaped how a lot of people view these things too. So it's so interesting that it kind of prompted you to like lean into where you're at. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
It's an awesome story. All right, cool. Do you have anything else?
No, I think do you have to go?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I've got a client.
You've got somebody in 2 minutes. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks
My
for taking the time
pleasure.
to jump on. Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, guys.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Tell Us More About That. Don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform it is that you're listening to us on, and also leave us a rating and review.
If you have any topics you would like us to consider, if you have any feedback or commentary, only if it's positive, please visit www.tellusmoreaboutthat.com.
Thanks again for joining in, and we will see you next time.
See ya.